Let's see, got it. Give you guys a second to agree so it doesn't kick you off. All right, well, welcome everyone for joining me in my kitchen tonight so that we can talk about make ahead breakfast. I know for a lot of us, you always hear breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and it's probably the one that a majority of us, if we miss a meal, it'll be breakfast. And part of it is because mornings are busy. I know for me, I get myself ready, 2 kids, trying to get things put together, go to work. There's lots of different reasons that it's hard to slow down and be able to put something together nutritious short of going in a cabinet, maybe grabbing cereal on a good day if you have time. A lot of other times just having coffee and tea and thinking, well, I'll grab something later. So I wanted to go through savory and sweet. Not all of us like to have our savory, here, and I'll move this up so you guys can see me for now because it's not going on my other camera, so that you can have an option. Because if you don't like to have sweet all the time, that's okay. Sometimes we have a taste for it, sometimes we don't. So we're going to start with our savory breakfast, which would be doing like egg frittata cups, really easy, nutritious, and something that you can prep ahead using a muffin tin and not have to worry about getting out the pan, chopping up the vegetables, getting everything cooked. You honestly could take it out of your refrigerator or your freezer, depending on how long you're storing it, and then get it into the oven or microwave, heat it up, and you have breakfast within a couple of minutes. So we're gonna look at that first. We're doing the make ahead frittata cups with lots of veggies in it. I went ahead because with TV magic, we want to make sure that we can get everything cooked in time. So on the recipe I sent, I gave a rough estimate. I'm going to turn this on here. I'll turn it down a sec. Said about 3 cups of chopped vegetables. You can use bell peppers. You can use broccoli, cauliflower, anything that you enjoy eating that works well to kind of saute it. I use a couple different color bell peppers, and we also want to do some little softer items. Our onions, which always add great flavor. If you feel like adding garlic, you could definitely do that. When I was looking through it, like getting ideas for recipes, a lot of people would add that as a nice savory element. But myself, I prefer onion, like especially earlier in the day. And on this one, I'm going to be adding spinach. I did a test one last night and I did broccoli and I thought that was just as good. But as long as you're making it pretty, we're always thinking color. We want to make sure that we get a lot of colors, textures. We want it to be interesting for our mouth so that it's not something that we don't enjoy. Oh, I see I got my other camera up. So I'm going to tilt this down. We have a little hot plate here so that we can do some cooking. We're going to heat up some olive oil because though, there are some people, you technically could take your vegetables, throw the cut up raw vegetables into the muffin tin with our eggs and then cook it. It'll be a lot crunchier. So if you prefer a more crunchy texture, that's up to you if you like it. I like it to be a little bit softer. I don't want it too crunchy. I want to make sure that it's going to hold together well because sometimes too much crunch along with an egg trying to bake it basically into a frittata might end up being kind of an issue, like a little bit fall apart. So I grab this. We're going to heat up a little olive oil so that we can cook our veggies. Use about a tablespoon or so. Now when I cook, I always do on these videos half of a batch. So I'm doing only 1.5 cups of vegetables that you're going to see right now. It's a lot easier to work and get it done versus doing the entire recipe. But the entire recipe would make 12 of the frittata cups for you. Here's the beauty of actually being in my own kitchen. I can turn around and get all the utensils I need. So you want to take your crunchy vegetables, your stiffer texture vegetables first. That's going to be our bell peppers and our onions so that we could get it in here on the oil and make sure that it's going to have enough time to get tender. Now, what the recommendation I have would be about 5 to 7 minutes. It just depends on your personal preference. Some people like a little bit more crunchiness, others like it really soft. So since you're making it for yourself, fit your own need. I usually go about 5-7 minutes, kind of looking for when the onions are a little more translucent because that means we've been cooking them long enough. Gives us the idea that they've had enough time to get soft. So we're going to get this going. Now with anything, you want to add a little bit of flavor. We're going to add some seasoning into our eggs, but we'll also be, doing a little seasoning along with our bell peppers. This is a good time where I'm just going to add a little bit of garlic powder, because that way I can get a touch of that garlic flavor, but not have it overwhelming for my breakfast meal. I should clarify, this technically we're talking about make ahead breakfast, but there's nothing about any of these foods that say you have to have them at breakfast. If you like to sit down and have like a little frittata cup for lunch, go ahead. There's no rules. And sometimes, one of my favorite things to do, even on a busy work week, is to do breakfast for dinner, because most breakfast dishes are a little quicker cooking than if I'm starting with like an animal protein, like chicken, fish, beef, or pork, and trying to get that done in a shorter period of time. So get this going. Now it's up to you if you want to use a little salt and pepper. I'm going to give you a little secret. I love this spice. So I'll show you on the camera here. This is our 21 seasoning salute from Trader Joe's. It has a variety. I'll just read off. It has onion, spices, black pepper, celery seed, cayenne pepper, parsley, marjoram, bay leaf, oregano, thyme, rosemary, mustard seed, garlic, carrot, lemon peel. So it's got a little bit of everything in it. And it's really great for just adding a punch of flavor if you're not using salt, because there's a lot of us who are a little bit more careful with our salt intake, whether it's blood pressure, any sort of, fluid retention, making sure that we're keeping things tasting good, but not relying upon salt to be the only flavor profile that we eat. And that's my favorite thing to do, is just really play with the herbs and spices. While this is cooking, you're going to be getting your eggs ready. Now in here, I have, for the recipe, you're doing 6 whole eggs and 4 egg whites. Sometimes, we get a little nervous and we think, I don't want to be doing too many eggs or the cholesterol. And anyone who's talked with me has told you more and more, they're taking the worry over cholesterol in food down and looking more at saturated and trans fat. Eggs are not high in saturated and trans fat. So they are a great healthy option to use the whole egg. Now, as far as cooking and doing these frittata cups or these baked egg cups, if you use just egg whites, it's going to be really spongy and it will probably fall apart. It just doesn't have enough texture without the yolk to hold together and do what we want it to do. So when that's mixed in there, if you want, you can add, I'm going to throw in just a little bit of oregano in it. You can throw a little more seasoning. You can do basil, thyme. You can do more of that 21 seasoning salute. Whatever you enjoy, throw it in there. If you want to make it spicy, throw in a little crushed red pepper or like cayenne pepper. Now back to here, I've been going on this for about 6 minutes. So it's a good time to go with our softer textured vegetables. So that's going to mean my mushrooms. Throw these in, chopped up. If you don't like mushrooms, don't add them. It'll taste just as good. Like I said, any vegetables that you like, put in there. I'm adding to this one a little spinach. And it's great because now we see a lot of color. We have our orange and our red, our green, and a little bit of white. So it makes for a really pretty presentation, when the food's done. So it doesn't take too much longer. You only need about 2 minutes to soften up these vegetables, and they'll be ready to add into our frittata cups. It's looking good. So you're going to be using a standard muffin tin, the regular size, not mini. No mini muffins on this. If you want to make a smaller portion, you're just going to have to adjust the cooking time. So I'm going to pull this over for a sec. All right, give me one moment. I'm going to move things out of the way. So that we're able to build this. So you're gonna have your cooked veggies sitting over next to you. I got them off to the side here because I want you to be able to see the muffin tin. And we have our muffin tin. So you do not want your egg cups to stick in here. You got to prepare it ahead of time. So you can either use like just a pan cooking spray. I also have an olive oil spray that you can put in there, whatever you enjoy. If you just want to take and butter it really well, if that's your preference, you can do that. But make sure you cover each tin so that it doesn't stick and fall apart. Now I'm prepping the whole thing. I'm only going to have enough, since it's a half batch, we'll have just enough to fill half of our tins. So this is great. I like to make sure I have the right proportion in every cup. So you could just kind of scoop a little bit out. But if you're using, you can use 1/4 cup little measuring cup, fill that up, and you're going to dump that into each one of your muffin tins here. You'll see it'll fill, it'll go about halfway, maybe a little bit more. And then we're gonna fill it up once we get this in here with our egg mixture. Now I even have a little bit extra in here, but I'm just gonna do that much. I don't wanna overfill it because then it's really hard to get enough of our egg mixture in. Same thing, there should be just about 1/4 cup worth for each cup of this egg mixture, but I'm just gonna make it easy. I'm gonna pour it in, can go back and forth, make sure we're getting enough to cover the vegetables. It'll come up to the sides. It's gonna fill close to the top. All right.
There's a question, Becky.
Please.
Mary wants to know, can you freeze these after they're made?
Yes. Once they're completely cooked through, you're going to let them cool. They'll sit in our pan for about 15 minutes once you take it out of the oven, just to make sure it's set a little bit. You'll set it off on a cooling rack. Then you're able to remove them when they're completely cooled. If you're going to freeze them, the best thing to do is going to be taking a little plastic wrap around each one and then putting it in an airtight container, whether you have a Tupperware in your freezer, or often what I will do is just use like a resealable storage freezer bag. So as long as you have each one wrapped, if you don't want to use plastic, you can use aluminum foil. Plastic wrap's a little easier to manipulate around these since they're not going to be square. And you can keep them 3 to 5 months in the freezer. So it makes it so you could pop out one at a time. You can thaw them, or you can cook them from, frozen in the oven. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of cheese on top. You can omit the cheese if you don't want it. You can use a different one. I prefer feta on my eggs. I really like that more Middle Eastern flavor to it. If you like cheddar, you want to use Gouda, you like to have, smoked Gouda, just sprinkle a little bit on top. It'll sink in, it'll melt when it's in the oven, and it will be perfect. And then we have all those prepped. When they're done, they're going to go into the oven for at 350, and they cook for about, I think I did about 20, or no, a little longer, 18 to 20 minutes. I always try to be a little conservative and then go back to it. I want to make sure I'm not cooking it too long. And I think I did right between, it was almost 20 minutes was perfect. So it depends how consistent your oven is. So we're going to set this aside for a second. We'll look at the finished product in just a moment, but now we're going to finish off our savory because we want to get, our complete breakfast. So what I gave you was doing a sweet potato hash brown. It's fall, thinking more of those nice, beautiful orange colors. It makes it, I think it's a pretty presentation. Because when you look at your sweet potato, in the recipe I said to get 2 large sweet potatoes. that's pretty much, here's a large, this is pretty large. You know, they're never uniform. I've never found like 2 sweet potatoes that look at all similar. So you want 2 about this size, maybe a little bit smaller would be right for your recipe. You don't have to sit and worry about measuring it. Now I took and did this ahead of time because it's not that interesting to watch me grate it up, but I found it worked really, really well using my grading function on my Cuisinart. So if you have never done this before, and I'm going to be honest, I never ever did this before. I've always just kind of hand graded everything. But if you have a Cuisinart like this, it's perfect. You just put together the little blades, stick it in, and it's awesome. You just feed it through the top, you know, and I got the perfect texture on my sweet potato. So this, believe it or not, is about 1 sweet potato. You get a lot of mileage out of one of these. So it's grated up. It's going to have, you know, sweet potatoes are a lot drier than regular potatoes, than white potatoes. I shouldn't say regular, I should say white. If you are not a sweet potato fan, you can still do the same recipe, just use your grated white potatoes. It will work the same. The flavors are going to work well. You're just going to end up cooking the white potatoes longer because they have more moisture. And you'll notice here I have a paper towel underneath because I want to make life easy on the white potatoes. I actually just got some shredded potatoes, like hash brown ready potatoes from the grocery store that were in the freezer. I rinsed it in a colander and then I let it sit so that I could get as much moisture out of this as I can. You really want to be able to squeeze it so that it's not going into your recipe wet. Never have that problem when it comes to our sweet potatoes. So we're going to take a bowl. We will put our sweet potatoes in here. That's a good amount. So after that, we're going to add our panko. Now, if you've not used panko breadcrumbs before, I always do these recipes before I show you, and I try a couple different ways and see what I like best. I used regular breadcrumbs last night when I tried it. It really did not work very well. Panko, you'll notice it's super light, it's flaky, it has a little bit more crispness to it. So it's a little bit more airy. You're not using very much in this recipe. You're only using half a cup. It doesn't need a lot for the entire 12 muffin cups of this, sweet potato hash. So it's worthwhile getting the lighter breadcrumb because your texture is going to turn out. And that is what I wrote on your recipes that I sent you because you want to have that right texture. So in here, I have my panko and also grated Parmesan. We want it grated. You want it nice and soft. You don't want shredded because you want it to be able to mix into here really well. You can add more seasonings. This is a good time if you want to put in like a little onion powder or garlic powder. My 21 seasoning salute, if I wanted to do that again, you're going to sprinkle some seasoning so you have flavor. If you want to add salt or pepper, this would be a good time to put it in because once we have everything mixed up, it just goes into our muffin tin and we don't have to do anything else but wait for it to cook. Let me grab some gloves real quick. So between our cheese and our breadcrumbs, and then we're going to add some olive oil and be able to get it to stick together so it gets a nice texture. Now, when I was looking up doing hash browns, I looked at several ways, different ways, what would be a good amount to put on here. And some recipes had just the sweet potatoes. And, really the comments were the problem with just plain sweet potatoes, if you don't add any cheese, if you're just doing sweet potatoes, seasonings and oil, is they get very dry. So you saw there's not a ton of moisture. If you've ever worked with a sweet potato, even cutting through a sweet potato is a challenge because it's a pretty dense vegetable. So you want to make sure you're adding more moisture because if we're going to be cooking this and then wanting to reheat it, if you have a very dry texture potato, it's just not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be worth making. So thinking that this is making 12 servings and I have, only half a cup of grated Parmesan in it. And you could always decrease it a little bit, but you want enough to coat it. And you'll see there's just a little bit all over in here. I'm going to take the same cooking tray because I'm going to tell you a little secret about my house. I only have one muffin tin. I do not cook muffins very often. So after doing this, I'm like, I think I need to invest in a second one because it'd be easier. But I usually you're going to be cooking these separate because this is going to go for about 20 minutes. Potatoes take longer. It's going to take about 40 minutes to do our potatoes. So you're going to take this and really, really fill the whole cup and push it down because it is going to shrink. So you're almost overfilling the cup and making sure that you're pushing down so that you're completely filling each tin. So don't feel like it's not going to bubble up like our eggs will get a little bit bigger. Our potatoes will get a little bit smaller. So they end up kind of meeting in the middle. And you'll see with my one large potato, with half my recipe right here, I have just enough for filling my 12 tins, which is perfect, exactly what I want. If you can always make it a little smaller. Think I went through and looked at the proportions on this because sometimes people wonder like, potatoes are bad. I shouldn't eat them. Is that a lot of calories, a lot of starch? We have so many comments, so many worries when it comes to some of our starchy vegetables that we get concerned about it. But if you follow this recipe, each one of these muffin cups of potatoes should be about 110 to 120 calories. So if I'm eating one of those along with one of my eggs, which depending on how heavy you do the cheese or not, it's about 50 to 70 calories. It's a pretty decent breakfast. It's not very heavy. You're getting less than 200 calories. So these together makes a nice savory breakfast. So I'm going to set it aside so you can see the finished product. So you'll notice that here is my baked sweet potato cups. They're lovely. They're nice. You're able to pick them up. They're a little brown around the edges. When I worked through this, I ended up doing them for about 40 minutes. So the recipe calls that you do about 30 to 40 minutes so that you get the right amount. You'll notice they should hold together. When you take them out of the oven, you're really letting them sit in the pan for about 15 minutes so it cools and you're not like having it crumble apart as you're trying to put it on the plate. Now, for the white potatoes, it's a nice color, but these took another 10 minutes. So I did cook them a little bit longer because they had more moisture in them. I wanted to make sure I could really dry them out and that I wasn't going to take a bite and have it be kind of, raw in the middle. So kind of a nice presentation between our two. So depending on whether you like the sweet potato or white potato, or maybe you make a little bit of both and keep everyone in your house happy. But that is how that turned out. And then I'll show you with our egg dish, our little frittata cups. Once they came out, you can see you have sort of a nice color all the way through. You have the cheese melted on top and it worked really well. Now, I love to show you when I screw something up because I think we learn a lot when we have mistakes. So I had gone to the store and I was like, I got to make these. Is there a quick way I can just practice it rather than having to get out the Cuisinart and shred up my fresh potatoes, my sweet potatoes? And I'd went to Trader Joe's and they had these sweet potato ribbons. You'll notice they're kind of cut looks like fettuccine a little bit. It's really flat. The reason they make this, you can put it in a stir fry. They're easy to incorporate into soups. They're nice and light. And I had I'm like, I'm just going to use this. And I sliced each of them down into the grated shape. I just kind of stacked them, sliced them. But what happens? Now we already went back. We'll have to go back to the idea that sweet potatoes are already a dry vegetable. And when I cooked it only for 30 minutes, this is what happened. It completely dried out, turned black. This is for 30 minutes using a prepped potato that's sitting in a cooler. So the takeaway is don't use a fresh one. Take a potato, take the time to either use like a box grinder or put it into the Cuisinart, because it just dried out too much using that product that had been in the refrigerator, that it ended up being completely unusable. And I had to recreate that one today. But I want to tell you, I have a lot of mess ups and I end up probably coming away with more information from them. So now you have a little knowledge nugget about sweet potatoes. All right, so now we've done our savory. Let's move on to our sweet. I really like, now that it's getting cold out, I like oatmeal. You may not be an oatmeal eater, but when it's getting nicer out, I'll flip this up again so you guys can see me again. I want to be able to have something a little different. Most of my summer, I do, smoothies. I'll use fruit, vegetable smoothies. And I think it's great. It's kind of refreshing. It's light. But sometimes when it gets a little colder out, it's nice to do oats. But I don't like taking a lot of time in the morning to make my oats. So I sent you 2 recipes. One, it's fall, it's pumpkin season. I sent you a pumpkin spice overnight oat recipe. Now, what's nice about overnight oats is you don't have to do a lot of work. You're literally just taking a jar. And I bought a bunch of jars like this. These are 8-ounce mason jars. I find this portion is the right size. There are sometimes you'll look up recipes and they have you doing like, 12 to 16 ounces. And I think I personally, when I'm eating oats, I want to finish what I have, and I'm not going to eat 12 to 16 ounces. It's a lot. It's a lot to take down in one meal. So all the recipes you have are portioned out for 1 jar so that you know what's put in. If you only want to make 2 jars, that's great. They're going to last in your fridge for like 5 days. So you could get, portion it out for 5 days and do a little bit more. I did 2 different recipes because not everyone likes pumpkin. I like it, but I don't like it overwhelmingly strong. So just so you know, the recipe I gave you, when I was doing reference recipes for it, there are some people who use a significantly more of the pumpkin puree than I did. I want a hint of pumpkin. I want to taste the spice, but I don't want it to taste like I'm opening up a pumpkin puree can and tasting it, because I think that can be a little off-putting. So we'll start with looking at the overnight oats for the pumpkin. So you're going to take, real simple, you want to do your old-fashioned oats. This is just a Trader Joe's one. Do not do quick oats. You need to have the texture of your old-fashioned oats, because when you're soaking them overnight, if you had the quick oats, you'll notice these are nice whole oats. The quick oats will get really mushy and it won't have as good a texture or mouthfeel. And though, when you make them and, boil it up, sometimes you might be used to that really mushy, soft texture. But when something's soaking in your fridge for, could be, depending when you put it together, it could be 12 hours, it could be 5 days. You want a little more texture to it, but you don't want it to be steel cut, because steel cut is really, really coarse and it's not going to be the right texture once I put everything in to soak it. So just go with the old-fashioned oats, whatever brand you like. They could be gluten-free, they could be traditional, doesn't matter. So you're going to start with putting your oats in here, and then you want to add, chia seeds or flax seeds. Now I have in here some ground flax seeds because I'm going to do another recipe with chia. I decided that I wanted to use some different flavors and textures. Flax seeds are great. They have a good amount of fiber, great for omega-3s, healthy fats. And then we're also doing our pumpkin pie spice. So I just went simple and bought the pumpkin pie spice actually in the container. But if you want to go and get cinnamon and nutmeg and cloves and ginger and do everything separately and kind of play with it, that's fine. So you're going to take your spices and your flaxseed, you're just pouring it in over your oats. The next thing we want to do is milk. Now this is where you have a lot of options. I'll show you here. We have coconut milk. And this is just, you'll notice when I buy them, it's just, you'll buy them on the shelf generally. Sometimes they're already in the refrigerated case. Once you open it, refrigerate it. I will always find unsweetened. That's my preference. I don't need a bunch of sugar added in ahead of time. Same thing like for people who use almond milk. Look for the unsweetened. Sometimes the unsweetened will have vanilla extract added to it, not any sugar. It's just vanilla extract. So generally the calories run about 30 to 40 calories. I don't prefer drinking milk by the glass because it bothers my stomach. So I generally use these, but you could use regular milk. You do not have to use milk alternatives. There's even now, you go to the store now, there's oat milk. I have bought hemp milk, which has a really, really nice texture, a little bit more fat and creaminess than what you would find in your almond milk or your coconut milk. So it adds a nice layer of flavor. And that's important. When you are playing with the milk and you're adding different flavors and textures, you want to make sure that you're using one that is, appeals to you. So for this, almond milk and coconut milk really don't taste very different. You're just adding in 1/4 cup. So throw this in. And then after that, our little bit of the pumpkin puree. So just get a can of pumpkin. You're going to scoop out 2 tablespoons. As I said, there was a recipe that had 1/2 cup in the same portion. 2 tablespoons, in my opinion, was just enough to get the flavor. If you want less than that and you're like, you know what, I'm going to do just 1 tablespoon, just add a little bit more milk. You just want to, the pumpkin is also adding some a little bit of moisture in here. So you want to make sure it's not too dry. So make sure if you take away one thing and adjust it, that you're adding in a little bit of the other to sort of give the balance that you need. Now, having plain oats that have no sweetness is generally not that appealing. So we're going to add a little bit of maple syrup, or you could do honey. This is pure maple syrup. There's nothing else in it. It doesn't have any extra sugars added. So I like to do a little maple syrup with oats, just about a teaspoon. You don't need very much. If you don't want any extra sweetness, you don't have to. And then I prefer adding a little bit more vanilla. There's a touch that was in my almond milk. If you're using regular cow's milk, then add a little vanilla. It's on the recipe. And to bump this up a little bit, and make it creamy, we're using yogurt. Now, I always recommend doing Greek yogurt because it has a nice amount of protein, and it's a great way of getting a little bit more of the protein that we need. Plus, it's adding a little more calcium into our dish. So we're going to scoop this in. And now we have everything that we need. So with the overnight oats, the great thing is you don't have to do much else. When you have something like this, you'll see we got the layers. I'll turn it sideways. You can see on here. See, we have our layers of our pumpkin, our spice, and our Greek yogurt and it's plain. It's not flavored. You do not need a flavor. You're already adding enough flavor in there. So make sure you get plain. You can decide for yourself. You're going to mix it up a little bit, sort of get the flavors down there. If you don't mix it, you can do it the next morning, but the milk will come to the bottom. And you'll notice on the 2 different overnight oats recipes I had for you, one has the instruction not to mix, just to layer it, and one has the instruction to mix. So we're going to see with our finished product how that looks different. So you just mix it up, put the lid on, and then it's good to go. And you can use this, depending on how you like to eat it. Some people will just grab it, open it up, and on your recipe, it said add like a little topping to it. If you want to add nuts, you want to add dried fruit, you want to add fresh fruit. Sometimes you just grab it and eat it with a spoon. I will put mine in the microwave. I like it a little warm. That's my preference, but they're made, you could eat it warm or cold. It does not matter. Whatever tastes good to you. Now, since there are people who don't like pumpkin, and I totally understand, we sometimes get pumpkin saturation in our culture nowadays. We are also going to look at our apple. We have an apple cinnamon overnight oat. So for the apple cinnamon, and then we'll look at the finished product in just a second with that, we're going to do the same thing. We're starting with our oats, but this time we're not going to mix. So we have 1/3 cup of oats in the bottom of our jar. And then this one has a lot of seasonings to it. You know, in here I portioned out, we have our ginger, cinnamon, ground cloves, and a little pinch of salt just to bring out that flavor. You can always skip the salt. You're gonna toss that on top. Then for our next layer, we actually wanna do some fresh apple. So I cut up a Honeycrisp apple. They said like half of a medium, you know, here's about the size of a medium apple. This might be technically small. I will just look as I'm adding it, and I'll show you once we get a layer, because I want room. You know, we're still gonna put in our milk. We're still gonna put in some yogurt. So when I say half, you know, half of a apple, probably did about that much. There's still space at the top. I didn't even use my whole, you know, apple that I cut up, and that's not even the entire small apple that I was using. Then we're gonna take either almond or coconut milk and do 1/3 cup. You're just gonna pour it right over the top. So grab my 1/3 cup. We're gonna pour it on the top of our products here. Tilt back down. Little bit of syrup or honey, depending on your choice, just to add a little bit of sweetness in here. And it's nice when it's liquid, it's gonna mix in really well versus something that's granular. I did a test originally with the pumpkin overnight oats and used honey because I was out of syrup. It was fine. It was still good. It had great flavor. There wasn't a huge difference between using the honey and the syrup. So it really comes down to what you prefer, or sometimes the reality, what you have in your cabinet. So we're going to do another 1/4 cup of just the plain yogurt on top. And this time, we're just going to let it sit. We're not mixing it. So this one is even easier because we're not doing anything more than stacking everything in it and then just letting it rest. There's not a lot of work to be had. Make sure I have everything. If you would like, you can sprinkle a little ground flaxseed on top to get, you know, a little bit more. You can do a little chia seed if you want to, whatever you like. I happen to have a little chia seed handy right here, so I'll just sprinkle some chia on top. And then I'm going to cover it up, and this will go into the fridge. And you can see when it's done, we have our nice layers again. We have, I don't want to reflect out there, you have your apples, you can see your spices, and you have your yogurt on top. So let's see what they look like now, because I had these two, so we can see how they actually turned out. I'm going to get a couple little bowls so we can put it in there. Here's my bowls here. This will start with our pumpkin overnight oats. The only sad thing about doing this at home is you guys don't get to taste anything, which kind of is disappointing because it would be nice to get, you know, you to be able to try it, because I know that's usually the concern with most of us if we're trying something new, is like, I don't know. And I'll be honest, when I first did this, because I was playing with and just putting a little bit of pumpkin puree in it, I was at first thinking, gosh, I hope this isn't too pumpkin-y. And it really has a nice soft texture. This I made last night, so it's had time to really absorb and get, you know, that milk in there so that you're not getting the crispy, crunchy oats. But you can always heat it up. You do not have to eat it cold. So that turned out. So that's our mixed oat experiment. That's the one that we mixed ahead of time. Now we're going to look at our unmixed oat experience and see how that turned out. This is the apple cinnamon. So this one, I've got the nice, you can see the flaxseed that was at the very top, didn't mix it in. I have all the good layers. Let me rinse my spatula real quick. All right, so now, because this one has not been mixed and it's full to the top, it's probably easier, even if you're not going to heat it up, to throw it into a bowl so you can mix it, because trying to mix a completely full jar like that pretty much is going to be impossible. Smells really good. You know, this smells like apple cider because it had the apples sitting in there with the spices right underneath them. It really smells very good. And the flavor, when I've had this before, it was great because it's sort of like when you go and get that apple cider donut, you have that like savory sweetness along with the nice texture. But it's a really delicious breakfast that's easy. So, you know, between the two, there's not a huge difference that you can tell, other than this is going to have more crunch to it because we had the fresh apples. And you want to play with adding stuff on top. You know, some ideas. We have our dry shaved coconut, got my pecans here. These are dried cranberries. I also have my walnuts, and these are some dried blueberries. So you can add, you know, the recommendation when it comes to my pumpkin, of course, is putting a little bit of cranberry in here, and I'm going to add pecans because you get, it looks nice. I think for my apple, I would definitely just add some walnuts to it. I think that's enough. It's got the flaxseed in it. I don't need to add anything more than that. And then I'm ready for a quick breakfast on the go. Okay, I have one more overnight oat experience to or not overnight oat, but it is not it's not oatmeal. I should say it's overnight grain. Do we have a question, Sam?
Yeah, there's one question.
Yes.
In both types, do the oats taste like they're cooked, or do they taste like they're soggy?
They taste like they're a little bit coarser texture than if you boiled them. Because sometimes when we boil them, depending on how long you like to boil them, and if you're used to quick oats, it's going to have more texture. It is soft. It doesn't taste like you're having something raw. I mean, technically oats you could sprinkle and just eat the way they are, but it does have a good flavor and it is nice and soft and able to be eaten just like that. But I think if you take it and warm it up a little bit, it will be completely done. It'll only take you a minute or two, depending on whether you're using the microwave or you're going to actually like put it in a pan on the stove. And you'll get that same flavor and texture, but with something that you put together that's really healthy and not having to rely on like a pre-flavored packet. So I think you get a lot more depth of flavor because it's been sitting overnight and it's really developing. So can you substitute other things for pumpkin or apples? Absolutely. I have so many recipes there. You know, if you want to leave it out, you're thinking about your basic structure. As long as you're using your oats, you have some sort of dairy or some milk, you know, using regular milk, the almond milk, coconut milk, hemp milk, some sort of liquid for it. And then also adding in, you know, you could start with dried fruits. You could throw nuts in there. You could use mangoes. You know, I picked more fall flavors, but there's a lot of different flavors where people might do coconut mango. I have a lemon vanilla. There's lots of ways to bring in the flavors you enjoy other than these two. So yes, you are not locked into those two things. I was going to show you something else. Now I want to give you just sort of a visual because there are people who just do the milk and the oats. And I want you to see what that looks like rather than having some sort of like yogurt in there. Because you notice our recipes, we had Greek yogurt in both of them. Now this I did last night too, and it was really simple. It literally was oats, cinnamon. There was some maple syrup in it. And then I think I used almond milk. And you'll notice with this one, and this is the way it's supposed to be, it's a lot drier. It actually looks more like what you would expect to see if you kind of threw together a really quick instant, you know, oatmeal pack, you add the water to it. But this one doesn't have the same creaminess that you'll notice that you have here. To me, I wanted to mix this up and just see what it looks like. But I have to say, looking side by side, especially if I'm going to eat something on the go, this dry one that's just oats and liquid is not going to be what I'm going to use. It does not have a nice look to it. So, you know, the other trick might be if you're not using pumpkin, you're not using apple, do try to consider putting in some yogurt, whether it's, you know, regular yogurt, you know, you're doing just regular yogurt, Greek yogurt, or even like a non-dairy yogurt if you want to, because it does add a nice creaminess to this that I think is going to be a lot more appealing than something kind of dry. Not what I'd want. So my last recipe comes from my trip to Disney, had to be before COVID, so at least 3 years ago. I believe it was 3 years ago. And we would get up in the morning and get ready to go out to the parks all day. And they had a really nice buffet where I don't really like a big breakfast. I like something light, but a bowl of cereal before you're going to be outside in the heat. And we went in summer, so it's about 95. So you want something a little bit more, hearty to hold on to, but not like a huge meal. So they made chia pudding. And if you've never had chia pudding, it is delicious. Chia pudding is essentially just our chia seeds, and I sprinkled some on there. You'll see it's like a little dark seed when you use it, and a coconut milk, but not this coconut milk. Because, a couple months ago, I was like, I really want to have that experience again. Because I don't know how they made it at Disney. It was something that was already on a buffet. I just grabbed it. Every morning, I would grab that chia seed pudding. It tasted so good. It had a little bit of sweetness. It was something that would fill me up for a couple hours, and it didn't feel like it was really heavy. So I tried replicating it with, I believe I used almond milk, but one of these really light ones. These are low calorie. There's no fat in them. And it did not taste right. And I was thinking they must have done something different that I didn't realize, because I put it together and I ended up having a couple bites. I threw it out. It wasn't what I recalled. And as I was searching through and looking for chia pudding recipes, I ran across a couple different sites where they recommended using coconut milk. Like if you've ever done cooking, like Thai cooking, or sorry, I have a little bit of reflection off my light here. But the coconut milk you get in a can. So what is nice with this is when it's in the can, it actually has a little more fat in it, a little creaminess, and it tastes a lot better than when I'm using that coconut beverage that's really, really light. And even with this, and I'll tell you, for anyone who's worried, and this is not, and you'll notice this says light coconut milk. It's not the full fat coconut milk. It's not coconut cream. There's lots of different levels. This is the lowest in calories. So for a third of a cup, there's like 4.5 grams of fat. So it does add a nice texture. If you don't use this for the entire portion, I highly recommend that you at least use a little bit of the more fat coconut milk. Or what I might try next time I'm doing it is a little bit of hemp milk, because this is a nice dairy alternative, but it actually has fat in it, natural fat from the hemp seeds. So getting a little bit of fat into the food does add to that mouthfeel. It really is more pleasant on our taste buds. So with our recipe for the chia pudding, make sure I got my proportions here. Sorry, where's my reference? Super, super, super simple. It's you literally just take half a cup of this coconut milk. So we're going to take, I think I have a quarter of a cup that I use here. I'm just going to do half a cup. And you'll notice it has like a nice, creamy texture to it. If you don't want to do all, you could always do a quarter cup of the coconut milk and then a quarter cup of milk. If you're using regular cow's milk, I would use at least like 2% just to get, again, that nice mouthfeel of the fat so that it holds to it. It doesn't make it watery. And then this is 1 tablespoon and 1.5 teaspoons of chia seeds, which is a significant amount of chia seeds. So I'll pour this in here. It's a lot of chia. And if you've never eaten chia pudding, they start real crunchy. If you have chia right away, like if I just sprinkle it on something, it's really, really crunchy. But chia is amazing. It's almost like a tapioca where it will absorb a lot of fluid, and it gets really, really big and soft. So it goes from this little crispy black stuff to something that tastes really good. I'm going to pour in a little vanilla because I like that vanilla flavor. Now I'm not, this coconut milk doesn't have any flavor to it other than just the coconut milk. And also a touch of cinnamon, because everything's better with a little bit of cinnamon. So just sprinkle it. There's no specific measure on it. Then all you need to do is cover it and shake it. And you let it sit. After about an hour, you'll notice you can see the little black seeds in here. You're going to set it in the fridge, and after an hour, you want to go in and break up the seeds and make sure that there's no clumps so that it turns out the way you want it to turn out. Because if you get these dry clumps with the chia seeds, it's not going to be as pleasant. We'll open this up. So that chia pudding, you just saw what went through yesterday. Let me get another bowl. Our chia pudding is going to end up looking nice and creamy. You'll see the chia seeds got a little bit bigger, and it's really formed into a nice creamy texture, and it is so good. It might sound crazy, but chia pudding is probably become one of my favorite things to have for breakfast. And the best thing, which I think with the chia seed, because you already have so much fiber in it, is really throwing in some fruit and kind of having that quick, like on the go breakfast. And it's delicious. If you want to, you could even just keep it in the jar, throw some fruit on top. That I recommend, don't heat it up. You don't need to. It is perfect cold. It actually tastes a lot better cold, and it is a delicious breakfast. So now we've had 5 recipes. I think in the beginning I said 4. We've had our savory with our, we have our frittata cups, and we have our frittata cups. We have our hash brown cups. Both of these can be frozen. They're make ahead. So either keep it in the fridge in an airtight container for like up to 4 to 5 days, or wrap them individually and freeze them and use them, for the next few months. And our sweet, which is our chia pudding, I have to say this by far was my absolute favorite one. What is it? Will that much chia all at once upset the stomach? No, it's really, I think I broke down what was in there. Your chia, you're getting about like the total of this. You're not getting a ton of carbs. You're going to be getting, it's a little bit more protein heavy. And I'm pulling my chia seed bag just so I can tell you. So any of you who worry about fiber, this will have a total of 6 grams of fiber, a little bit less, because we're only doing 1 tablespoon and 1.5 teaspoons. So 6 grams of fiber is a good amount when you're looking at trying to do 25 grams of fiber per day. It is not a really heavy fat food, so it shouldn't make your stomach upset. Like I said, if you want to go a little bit lower on the fat, because if you use the total amount of the coconut milk for this, it will bring you to 14 grams of fat, but you can cut that in half by doing half of the canned light coconut milk and half of a dairy alternative. And that would bring it down a little bit. And you still can get that creamy texture, but it should not. I would always, if it's something new and you're prone to getting your, stomach upset, then start with even, you have it in a jar, just eat it, small portion of it, do like half of the portion and see how you feel. Any other questions with all of our recipes between our overnight oats, our chia pudding, and our savory cups? Do your children eat any of these recipes? They do not eat potatoes. They don't like them. They do like the eggs. That one worked out well. And I'll be honest, I can't sell them on the chia pudding because they're still weirded out by it. But I can't even sell my husband on it. But I did get him. He actually did like the overnight oats with the pumpkin in it, which was, I wasn't sure. That was my test, because I'm like, okay, if he thinks this is not too much and this isn't too over the top, then I know that it's a decent recipe, because I'm always willing to try like interesting seeds and grains. But yes, it will pass the test. Any other questions, ladies? I think we're all ladies. All right. Well, thank you all for joining me in the next cooking class. It's actually going to be 2 months, because I bumped one. We're going to the beginning of December, and it's going to be holiday treats. So I'm really excited for that. That's like my favorite thing, getting into the holidays and sort of cooking and healthy, always a healthy twist on it, but we always have to make it taste good. So thank you guys. It was nice seeing you here. I got to run to dance class.